Rip Van Winkle wanted a peaceful life, but his family farm was failing. Unless he changed, he might lose the home and everything his family depended on. The trouble was not cruelty or a bad heart. Around the village, everyone knew him as gentle, friendly, and willing to leave his own plans to help. Whenever a neighbor called, Rip Van Winkle put aside his own day and went gladly, certain that the small favor mattered more. He fixed a neighbor's wall or carried a heavy bag without complaint. He was helping village children whenever they called, and never seemed tired of their requests. For the children, he made toys, flew paper kites, and told old stories. They loved seeing him arrive because work became play whenever he joined them. Yet he avoided work on his own land. His fence fell down, his cow escaped, and wild plants filled fields that should have fed the family. His children wore old clothes. His small son often held up trousers that were much too large, while the farm around them became poorer each season. If Rip were a better farmer, his family would have enough food. However, he always found another task far from home and called it necessary. Her eyes followed every unfinished job: the leaning fence, the empty field, and the children's worn clothes. Silence from Rip only sharpened her worry. She worked hard and spoke to Rip with anger. Her sharp voice could heighten every small family problem, because fear stood behind each bitter word.
You help every house except your own. What will become of us?
Rip gave no answer. He moved his shoulders, looked upward, and walked outside. The blankness in his face made her even more angry. Wolf, his loyal dog, followed him out. Wolf was brave in the forest, but afraid inside the house, where Dame Van Winkle's anger frightened him. When Dame Van Winkle lifted a kitchen spoon, Wolf ran for the door. Outside, he stayed close to Rip, relieved to escape the tense room. Rip often sat with other men outside the village inn, beneath the large tree. There, talk moved slowly, and nobody asked him to mend a fence. The children were waiting near the bench because he always brought a story. Nearby, the men talked slowly, while an old newspaper passed between them. Rip enjoyed those quiet hours, with Wolf near his feet and friendly faces around him. For a while, the failing farm seemed very far away. His wife did not share that peace. Dame Van Winkle came to the inn and blamed everyone there for helping Rip waste time, while his family struggled. At last, even the inn brought him no peace. One autumn day, tired of blame and unfinished work, Rip took his gun and called Wolf.
Come, old friend. The woods will welcome us.
Wolf sprang up and followed Rip, away from the village. They left the last houses behind and followed a rising path through autumn woods. Cool air replaced the voices of the village as they climbed. Behind them, the village became small. Ahead, the trees grew dark and close. Rip kept walking toward the mountains, with Wolf beside him, and silence all around them. Rip and Wolf climbed for many hours. Rip followed birds and small animals up the mountain, never noticing how far they had traveled from home. Evening was falling when Rip rested on a green hill. Far below, the river shone between the trees, and the wide, beautiful view held him still. Yet thoughts of home could heighten his fear. He knew the path would become difficult and dangerous once the last daylight disappeared behind the mountain.
If I stay here much longer, I will reach home after dark.
Then a voice crossed the mountain calling, Rip Van Winkle, Rip Van Winkle. Wolf pressed close to Rip. Through the rocks, a short old man climbed toward them, carrying a small wooden barrel. He pointed at it, asking silently for help. Rip understood. The stranger's heavy little barrel had to cross the rough mountain, and Rip agreed to carry it with him. The stranger had thick gray hair and old Dutch clothes. His face was grim, and he did not speak as they carried the barrel through a narrow path. A deep rolling sound came from ahead, like faraway thunder. It grew louder as Rip, Wolf, and the silent stranger continued between the high rocks. Soon they entered the rocky glen. Strange men in old coats, wide trousers, and high hats were playing a game with wooden balls and pins. The men were playing, but no one laughed. There was no gaiety in their game. Every face remained serious, and each rolling ball made the mountains shake. Suddenly, the players stopped and looked at Rip. Their hard eyes stayed on him in silence, and his knees became weak beneath him. The old stranger poured a dark drink from the barrel. Without speaking, he used his hands to tell Rip that the waiting players must be served. Rip carried the cups around the group. The men drank in complete silence, gave him no thanks, and then returned to their strange, serious game.
If these men ask me to leave, I will go at once.
For a moment, no one watched him. He tasted the dark drink. It was sweet, strong, and warm. So he took another cup, then another, while the game continued without a sound. Soon the rocks seemed to move around Rip. His eyes closed, his head fell forward, and Wolf gave one worried cry beside his unsteady master. Rip sank down beside the grass. Unable to remain awake or understand the strange place any longer, he entered the deep blankness of sleep there. Rip Van Winkle opened his eyes beneath a bright sky. Birds were singing, and warm sunlight covered the green hill around him. He sat up slowly. The strange players were gone. Their grim faces remained clear in his mind, yet their game had left no mark upon the quiet ground.
Oh, that drink. What shall I tell my wife?
He looked for his gun. A rusty old weapon lay beside him. Its wood was broken, and its metal was brown with age. Wolf was nowhere near.
Wolf!
Only the mountain answered his call. Rip Van Winkle tried to stand, but his body was stiff. His knees hurt, and his back felt weak. If he returned home like this, his wife would speak all day. He searched for the path into the glen. A stream was rushing through the place where he had walked, while thick plants now covered the rocks. The flat ground and silent players could not be found. A haunting sense of loss followed him as he searched the changed mountain for some familiar sign.
Wolf!
He called again, but there was only blankness between each call. Rip Van Winkle became hungry, so he started down the mountain. The walk took much longer than he expected, and every slow step made his aching body complain. His beard now touched his chest, although it had been short before. He kept feeling it in surprise as the village finally appeared below him. Near the village, he met people in strange clothes. They stared at his gray beard and rusty gun, and he knew none of them. Children followed him and pointed. Dogs barked as he passed. There was no gaiety in their cries, only fear and surprise at the strange old man. The village itself had grown. New houses stood beside wider roads, and many old homes were gone. Rip Van Winkle searched among unfamiliar buildings for the road home. At last, Rip Van Winkle found the Van Winkle house. Part of the roof had fallen, the door was broken, and the rooms stood empty.
My family! Where are you?
His cry passed through the empty rooms, but no one answered. A thin dog came near the ruined house, but it showed its teeth when Rip Van Winkle spoke Wolf's name. Even this animal treated him like a stranger.
My own dog has forgotten me.
He said it sadly and turned away. He turned toward the old inn. Perhaps his friends could explain this grim morning. He followed the road to the village inn square, still carrying the rusty gun. Rip Van Winkle reached the village inn square, expecting old friends and a familiar welcome. Instead, unknown voices rose around him beneath the bright morning sky. Yet the inn had changed too, and a loud crowd stood outside. Rip Van Winkle stopped at the edge of the square, surrounded by unfamiliar voices. Rip entered the square, where people were arguing loudly about an election. The quiet old inn was gone. In its place stood a large wooden hotel. A flag with stars and red stripes flew above the hotel. On its painted sign, the old king had disappeared and become a general, dressed in blue. The changes were subtle at first, but each new detail made the village feel less familiar. Rip searched every face in the crowd for one old friend. A thin speaker pushed through the noisy crowd and stopped before Rip.
Which side do you support?
Rip stared at him in confusion.
I am a quiet man and a subject of the king.
The crowd grew angry, and some people called him an enemy. One man demanded to know why Rip had brought a gun to the election. A subtle fear entered Rip's heart. If this truly was his village, surely someone in the restless crowd would remember his name and know his face.
I seek my old friends.
He named the men who had once sat outside the inn, hoping one familiar name would bring an answer. The answers came quickly. One friend had been dead for 18 years. Another had gone to war. The school teacher had become an important public man. Rip felt blankness open inside him.
Does nobody know Rip Van Winkle?
Several people pointed toward a lazy young man standing beside a tree. The young man looked just like Rip before the mountain sleep. His clothes were old, his manner was slow, and even his lazy posture seemed familiar.
That is me. No, it cannot be me. I was myself yesterday.
People touched their heads and whispered that he might be sick. Their grim looks frightened Rip more than their questions. Then a young woman came forward through the crowd, holding a small child close beside her.
The old man will not hurt you.
Her voice carried a subtle memory. Rip studied her round face and brown eyes, feeling that the past was standing close before him.
What is your name?
Judith Gardenier.
And who was your father?
Rip Van Winkle. He went into the mountains 20 years ago. His dog returned alone.
The haunting truth became clear at last. Rip had not slept for a single night. A whole part of his life had passed without him. His voice shook as he asked his final question.
Where is your mother?
Judith looked down.
She died only a short time ago.
Rip reached toward her.
I am your father. Young Rip once and old Rip now.
Judith studied the old man's eyes in the crowded square. Suddenly, beyond his age and strange clothes, she saw the father she remembered from childhood. Judith held Rip Van Winkle tightly, and the child in her arms stopped crying. An old woman stepped out of the crowd, studying his face with growing certainty.
It is truly Rip Van Winkle. Where have you been for 20 years?
The villagers became quiet and waited for his answer. Rip told everyone about the short man, the barrel, and the game in the mountain glen. He described the dark drink and his single night of sleep. Some people laughed, while others shook their heads. Yet the oldest man in the village knew many mountain stories and asked the crowd to listen carefully. He said a great river captain and his sailors returned to the mountains every 20 years. There, they played a wooden ball game, and each strike sounded like thunder. The story's haunting details matched tales that older people had heard before. This agreement made Rip Van Winkle's strange words easier for the villagers to believe. Judith took her father away from the square and welcomed him into her comfortable home. Her cheerful farmer husband greeted Rip Van Winkle like a friend from long ago. Her husband had often played with Rip Van Winkle when he was a boy. The lazy young man by the tree was Rip's son, and he worked only while watched. Rip understood the family likeness. If he had become young again, he might have made the same mistake, avoiding work unless somebody stood nearby and watched him. Across the country, life had changed completely. The king no longer ruled them, and Rip Van Winkle was now a free citizen, though public affairs brought only blankness, because he understood little. Rip Van Winkle missed Wolf and many old friends. Remembering his wife, Dame Van Winkle, brought sadness too, but he knew he was safe with Judith Gardenier. Soon, Rip Van Winkle returned to the inn bench and made new friends. His warm stories brought gaiety to nearby children, whose bright questions could heighten his pleasure each time. A subtle smile often appeared when strangers doubted his tale. Rip Van Winkle never became grim or argued. Instead, he simply pointed toward the dark mountains.
When thunder rolls there, those old players may be starting another game.
People continued telling his story for many years. Some believed every word, while others believed none. Rip did not argue. He had lost 20 years, but found a home again. Here are some of the words you met in this story. Say each one to yourself.